Here are 5 books that I wanted to speak about today. There are 5 books that deeply affected me when I had deep depression. And, 2 of them came later, or one of them was actually in between. But let's go through them and talk a little bit about some good fiction and philosophical books, intellectual stuff, and so forth. All right, so let's talk about the first. The first will be Myth of Sisyphus by Albert Camus, and this was a good introduction to existentialism. Actually, he didn't like to be called an existentialist. He actually preferred the word absurdist. Doesn't matter much, but he has some point there, but it doesn't matter right here. So this book was quite important for me. It is a bit typically French, but I really loved it. I remember that I loved it. I haven't read any of these for quite some time, so you gotta forgive me for my memory here, but the gist of it is that he's discussing, he's basically taking Nietzsche's idea of amor fati and of loving your fate. It's basically that, but Camus gives us a question, he emphasizes a question. He questions life itself with the question: is life not just, is it worth living, but is suicide the true, is suicide the way, basically? Should one take one's own life? He actually has his own answer to how to get out of this. And, important stuff, in my opinion, is that you gotta be like Sisyphus, you gotta love to push that work, you gotta love to push that rock up that mountain, and it's basically amor fati, so yeah. But there is some scientific discussions there and so forth. So yeah. The next book, it's a good introduction. Before I go to the next book, Myth of Sisyphus is a good introduction to Camus before you go into his fictional stuff. It's basically an essay, so it's very short, goes quickly, but it is a bit complicated because it doesn't use logic it's not formal, so to speak. He uses logic, but he's not illogical, but he's almost a bit metaphysical, I think, without being metaphysical, because he thinks religion is, the religious faith, so to speak, is intellectual suicide. All right, so it's a bit cowardly, or so to speak. Oh, by the way, all right. So the next book is The Stranger, also by Albert Camus, and this book is very personal to me because there is a scene there in the book where the character Meursault, I think it's pronounced Meursault, he experiences this intense heat and basically wants to murder. And this, he's very inspired by Dostoevsky as well, by Nietzsche, Dostoevsky. All of these existentialists are basically heavily influenced by Heidegger, Nietzsche, Heidegger, Dostoevsky, perhaps Søren Kierkegaard, perhaps who else? A lot of these. And so perhaps even some ancient philosophers, Greek philosophers. Now, this book, that scene there, is very personal to me because I felt a very similar thing at one point during a summer, and I didn't murder, but I had this insane, I didn't want to murder rather, but I still had this almost on the edge there. I basically wanted to, you wanted to kill yourself basically. So you wanted to murder yourself, but I don't know, I got this yellow, bright, intense feeling, warmth. Now, of course, it was warm outside, and that's what triggers the character as well. So it triggered me as well. So it is something I believe that Camus perhaps felt and so forth. So yeah, it's deeply connected to me. Yeah. So the book after that was Steppenwolf by Hermann Hesse, and he's also one of my favorites. Now, this book is basically, it explains everything. If you want to understand depression, this is the book to read, in my opinion, or melancholy or tragedy or so forth, personal tragedy and inner tragedy, inner wisdom. It is such a beautifully written book. You gotta read this. Now, before I continue, a lot of these books might pull you down actually again. So if you have deep depression, I wouldn't recommend reading all of these in some sense, because you got to work on yourself. You got to change all these things. But if you don't want to change, but still want some path, this is a path I took. In that order, I believe. I read them in this order, I believe. But you gotta work on this, all right? But this is a way. I mean, this is one path that might help a little bit, because you'll identify with these characters and you'll relieve something out of yourself, within yourself, because it is as if you speak to someone because you're not alone anymore. All right, you realize you're not alone. You think you're alone, but you're not even close to being alone. All right, Kafka was also depressed. There are a lot of artists back in the day that were depressed, and a lot of philosophers as well. So yeah, you gotta work on stuff. You gotta act instead. You can't think your way out of this. All right, you can't think your way out of this, and you can't read your way out of this. But it might help a little bit. So that's the whole point of this video. All right. Before I continue, perhaps I should have mentioned this in the beginning, but who cares? All right. It doesn't have to be perfect. Nothing has to be perfect. Steppenwolf is not a perfect book. Neither is Myth of Sisyphus. It's far from perfect. But The Stranger feels closer to perfection in some sense, literary perfection here. But later books even more so. And the book after that is Thus Spoke Zarathustra, although I read Hermann Hesse's I didn't finish Steppenwolf. Well, perhaps I did. Did I finish Steppenwolf? Yeah, he goes through a lot of stuff. The character goes through love and everything, basically. Parties and stuff. But so it feels still quite modern. But yeah, not that matters in my opinion. Alright, the next book is Thus Spoke Zarathustra. And this book is just a masterpiece. It's incredible. It's just it might be the best book I've ever read. All right. And I always loved Tolkien. So the Silmarillion, always used to be my number one. But nowadays I'm not so sure if it's Zarathustra or Silmarillion. Perhaps Silmarillion is more, there is more grace, it's more uplifting in some sense. So perhaps Silmarillion is better, so to speak, for the spirit. But actually Zarathustra is also good for the spirit, because the bad is also good for us. So we can't just ignore that. All right? And it's also uplifting, because he reaches for the heights and he tries to overcome himself. So this is ultimately, I think this was the favorite book of Friedrich Nietzsche. So yeah, definitely was his favorite. No way the other books they're beautiful, but not this beautiful. This was it's an incredible book. Gotta read it. You gotta read it. Some parts of it you might read and reread and so forth. I believe this book will best help you out of depression of all of these books. I'll mention my bonus book. All right, I said 5, but let's do 6. Notes from Underground, which I've mentioned before, by Dostoevsky. This one might have been the most important, because I started laughing at myself. I didn't take myself as seriously, because I started laughing with the character which I felt close with. I felt very related to this character, and I didn't feel like the character was an artist or philosopher the way I feel like an artist and philosopher, but he felt more like or a thinker. He felt more like I don't know, like some formal guy, some economist or something, or a lawyer. I think he was a lawyer. I don't remember, but anyway, it doesn't matter. The character's inner feeling and stuff, that was the same, and especially in Steppenwolf. Steppenwolf goes through this very deeply, and the same way this with The Stranger, but The Stranger feels a bit more objective, while Steppenwolf feels like you're almost inside the head of Steppenwolf, but not quite with Meursault in The Stranger. It feels a bit more distant. Notes from Underground. All right, so I started laughing, and that was super important. I got myself a bit out of it, and some stuff there, I believe, pushed me towards change there. I started writing my book, which is very close to Steppenwolf, actually. And someday I will finish. Well, it is finished, but I gotta fix some minor stuff and add some stuff. But otherwise, I'll release it. Perhaps I'll release it soon. I have some other stuff I want to do that are much more important right now. So that's why I've delayed that. But it was important to me, the same way Steppenwolf is important. But when writing it myself, it felt as if I took myself out of everything. So I own myself. I did everything myself. No one else pushed me. Well, I got some help, but in other ways, by forcing me out to, socialize. And I always used to be a very sociable person, and I still am. So I'm back to myself. So depression is completely curable. If you didn't have depression when you were young, there is no way. I mean, it's 100% that you can get back to yourself. But that's not completely true, because you have this experience, so which changed you forever, but still, it makes you deeper, more. It gave you character. All right, so it's part of your character. Remember that in movies, for example, notice that imperfect characters are much more interesting than perfect characters. Perfect characters are so boring, but imperfect characters are interesting. All right, so there are some other stuff about that, but for example, Tarkovsky, one of my favorite directors, which is quite melancholic. Now, I don't know if I will change my opinion there, but right now he's still my favorite, but perhaps I'll change my opinion actually, but doesn't matter. He found it interesting with these non-conforming people conforming to society and norms. And he liked those who struggled and so forth. Well, he struggled himself, so. But you gotta take yourself out of this struggling artist identity, all right? It's not healthy. You will only destroy yourself if you just keep on going, all right? So that's why you gotta just finish reading these and just keep on going. And read Zarathustra last, and Hermann Hesse's, and that's the 5th book, by the way. So Hermann Hesse, we got Hermann Hesse's Narcissus and Goldmund. I want you to read this for the adventure. It's not that existential, but it is in some sense, but it is about life and so forth. But it is, I want you to feel this adventure. So, and for this urge for adventure to ignite within you. So that's why I want you to read this book. And so, yeah. So this book is also very important to me. Actually, first part of it I read when I was down, so to speak, depressed and whatever you want to call it. And then I don't identify with this. So I've destroyed, I've removed the past, all right? I killed my old self and I created my new self, all right? That came from the ashes of the old, all right? Like a phoenix, all right? So yeah, you do that. You just create a new identity and you move on, but you work on yourself and you focus on yourself so that you can move on. But if you don't want to listen to my words on acting on your desire and changing, and because you don't want to change, I know how you are in this state. You don't want to do anything. You're very unproductive and so forth, but you're very creative. There is a lot of wisdom there, but you're destroying yourself. You're going too much within yourself and just killing yourself, all right? Slowly, gradually. Eventually, you'll hit a wall there as well, or the depths, or the abyss, as Nietzsche called it. I usually say the depths, because it is deep waters. It's quite an experience, and it has many layers, and your awareness just goes, crazy. But it goes mad, and we have madness in Steppenwolf. I'm not going to say where and what, but there is a connection there. So check it out. But read these to understand yourself. Read all these books to understand yourself. But also with Zarathustra and Narcissus and Goldmund, try to move beyond. All right, try to move on. Try to act the same way Goldmund acts and gets out in the world and changes himself constantly. All right. Now it is a tragic, book in general, but still, he still loved his own nature, so to speak. So again, amor fati there, which connects all of them. And yeah, so if you have any problems with depression, anxiety, and all this stuff, you can connect with me. The email is down in the description, video description, and it's also in the about page. it's both in the text and in the link. All right. So if you need help, reach out and we'll set something up. We'll make a plan. We'll get through everything. All right. See ya tomorrow.